Barnaby Joyce and the Nationals. Is he a wasted force in a party past its use-by date? After Mike Baird's first New South Wales budget, is he now gunning for the premiership? And I asked the writer of At Home with Julia, how long before it really gets funny? Tonight on Showdown.
Hello and welcome to Showdown, a new program on Sky every Tuesday night at exactly this time. We've got a big first show for you. Barnaby Joyce, he's been good enough to come up to Sydney to take me on live in the studio. He's a Maverick Senator for the National Party, perhaps a future leader of the National Party. We'll talk to him about those issues. And a little later in the program, Mike Baird, the New South Wales Treasurer who delivered his first budget earlier last week. And in the process, he brought up a deficit, not a common thing for the Liberal Party to try to do. It's emulating Wayne Swan, who's delivered deficit after deficit. And later in the program, we'll also talk to a gentleman by the name of Rick Kalowski. Now, the name's not known to you, but the show probably is. At Home with Julia. It's on another network, it's on the ABC, but it's poking a fair bit of fun at our Prime Minister, and I really want to know from him whether or not he considers that appropriate, doing that with the Prime Minister, and is it something that is particularly harsh because she is a woman? That's protesters today. The carbon tax is the big issue of the day. There's no doubt about that. The government is bringing the legislation to Parliament. Debate starts tomorrow and they hope that it will pass Parliament by November. To discuss that and a wide range of other issues, we're joined now by sometimes maverick National Party Senator Barnaby Joyce. Thanks for your company.
You're welcome, Peter. I just want to clear something up at the start. You've put out sort of an assertion that I've been avoiding you, and I want you to know that I have.
All right, well, good to know. And let's see why. I want my first question to be, do you want to be leader of the National Party?
Yes, I do. And I think that's, within time. Do I want to challenge Warren Truss? No, I don't. Do I think Warren Truss is doing an exceptional job? Yes, I do. Do I think other people also want to be leader of the National Party? Of course I do. I think anybody who says that they don't want to be leader is probably not telling you the truth. I mean, if you believe in your party and you believe what it does, then obviously you would hope that at some point in time that if you work hard enough you might get the capacity of holding the mantle of leader.
Can you one day be leader in the Senate? It's not a precedent that there's been, to my knowledge, but I can't see why not. Is that something, what's your view? You
could do it, but it would certainly be unusual, and that's why I intend to try and make a move to the lower house.
OK. At the next election? At
the next election if I can, but obviously that's a decision for an electorate council. I can't just parachute myself in. You have to be invited, especially in the National Party. It's a very polite organisation.
But you sound pretty keen.
I think you've got to be up front. You know, if you want to sort of dance around it, as you would know, you know that everybody's ambitious. They all have their Field Marshal's baton in their back pocket. You might as well be up front and say what you want to do.
So you would be disappointed if you weren't able to politely find a seat in the lower house for the National Party at the next election?
Yeah, but I'd live with it and you get on, do other things, and you just go as hard as you can. But I think I've said quite a number of times, I intend to go to the lower house. That means you have to find a seat. But then it's up to electorate councils. Someone out there is looking for a person to do the very best job in their electorate, and I hope that they take me into their consideration for that.
Carbon tax debate is starting this week. The government hopes to pass the legislation by November. There's been criticism on your side of the parliament that you want more time for this debate. That's a bit rich, though, isn't it? I mean, Work Choices had even less debate than the government are giving here.
No, it's not. This is going to be the most fundamental change in the Australian economy, rebasing our economy on a colourless, odourless gas. Complete lunacy. It's not going to change the climate. Let's just get that out there straight away. It's just going to make people poorer. We haven't seen the legislation. 19 bills get brought into the lower house, and we really owe it to the Australian people. Whether you like the carbon tax, don't like the carbon tax, don't like us or like us, we are the ones who have to go through that with a fine-tooth comb, because we are your last hope, Obi-Wan Kenobi, to make sure that this thing actually works. Even if they've got a mistake, you're only going to find it if we find it for you.
That sounds like you're trying to find the mistake for them to pass it. Are you sort of accepting that it's going to pass, or are you more hopeful than that you can find one, maybe two defectors, if you like, to stop this getting through?
I believe in democracy. I believe that ultimately people do the honourable thing and represent their constituencies. I hope that is the case. If that's not the case, Peter, then we don't need members of parliament. We just go to the whip, give them a little paddle with a number on it and say, well, mate, your paddle's got 40, just go in there, 3 whips or 4 whips can go in, and we'll be through the legislation in a day. But if everybody's going to wander into the chamber, then we have to have the belief that someone has the nous, the fortitude, the courage, the perspective to say, this is not good for my community, it's not what they want, it's not what I got elected on, because remember, every lower house member got in on a lie, not just Julia Gillard, because they all went to the people of their electorate and said, my vote will never be one that's counted for a carbon tax. But obviously, it is going to be counted for a carbon tax, so they're all responsible, from Edith Darth to Sharon Greason to Joel Fitzgibbon, the whole lot of them. If you got a Labor Party member and you voted for them thinking they weren't going to bring in a carbon tax, and they vote for a carbon tax, then your lower house member is a liar, not just Julia.
But you know how seriously the Labor Party takes the idea of crossing the floor. It's an expellable offence for the party. That being the case, if you had to walk through a door and your life depended on it, do you think this carbon tax will get legislated or not?
Well, I really don't know whether that's the case. I mean, I don't know what the vote will be of Wilkie. I don't know what's going to happen to Mr. Craig Thompson. He's, some pretty serious mustard.
If you had to guess,
serious mustard on his tail at the moment, and we've got to see it. There's a whole range of things, permutations and combinations out there. What I do say is there are lower house members who will definitely lose their vote, lose their seat if they vote for this. They might lose their friends if they don't, but believe you me, they're not going to be your friends after you lose your seat. So you might as well stand up for yourself and stand up for your electorate and do the right thing and not vote for it.
See, there's plenty of coalition MPs, to play devil's advocate to that, who voted for the GST. They lost their seats, but now here we are more than 10 years later and we're looking at it, and most people admit that the GST is a good policy. Yeah. How do you know that's not going to be the case with the carbon tax?
We went to the election with the GST and said, if you vote for these people, you will get a GST. The people who are there at the moment, all the Labor Party lower house members and Mr Oakeshott and Mr Windsor are there because the government said there'd be no carbon tax. So they've got to go back to their electorate and say, look, I know I wasn't straight with you. In fact, I straight out lied to you. But I've been having a pretty good salary down in Canberra, and I just want you to, accept that. And, of course, punters won't. They'll say, no, sorry, mate, you weren't straight with me, so I'm going to make my judgment at the ballot box. You're gone.
You mentioned the carbon tax as a lie in terms of the last election. Be straight with me now. I've heard around the traps that you and other members of the coalition have expressed concerns privately about whether you really can unwind it once it's in. That's why you're fighting so hard to stop it getting in. Is there any truth in that?
There's certainly been discussions about how you unwind it. It's not going to be simple to unwind, but it's absolutely possible, and we will do everything within our power to unwind. And I'll be straight with you. I've been leading the debate saying we must unwind it, or not leading, being at the forefront saying it must go. You must say to the people, we don't want it and we will get rid of it. It is essential that happens because it's just so manic. I mean, this whole idea that 2020, $3.2 billion a year heading off in credits, and by 2050, what's $56 billion a year floating overseas to buy credits, and that's just the start of the insanity. We've now got a tax, Peter, for the first time. They can increase this tax without getting a piece of legislation through both houses of the parliament. They just go and tell the Climate Change Authority, the Climate Change Authority, tells them, you should jack up your tax. The minister says, all right, and up the tax goes.
You mentioned a figure of over $50 billion vis-à-vis the carbon tax. There's an opinion article in The Australian today by your coalition colleague from the Liberal Party, Jamie Briggs, and he's talking about subsidies for manufacturing and protectionism generally, and he's very, very critical of it. He raises a $50 billion figure as the amount of money, I think, since 2004 that has been spent to subsidise these industries which essentially couldn't survive on their own. He says some pretty controversial things. The truth is that we can't save jobs by government protection. Why is it that some jobs are worthy of government subsidy while others are not? And he also says in this article, now is not the time to return to our protectionist shell. Do you agree with that?
Well, let's look at it this way, Peter. If someone comes riding over the horizon now and in a bellicose way and says, well, we like Australia, we think we'll take it, and if you read your history books, they're full of wars, no matter how much we try to stop them, they always come back. I would prefer to go out to meet them with the benefaction of a steel industry as opposed to the benefaction of a carbon tax. Certain items are absolutely manifest in what a nation is and how it sees itself and how it protects itself and how we deal with these cyclical turns. I can live without a carbon tax. In fact, I'm better off without it. And so's every other lady who has to pay for the ironing, pay for the television set, and she doesn't want a collection mechanism for the ATO in the corner of her house.
But regarding
but she does need a steel industry.
But, OK, that puts you at odds with Jamie Briggs, though. This is a sort of an internal stoush on the right between free trade and protection.
No, not really. I mean, mean, I don't think that we believe in the liberty of thought. We believe in the liberty of the presentation of that thought. That is what differentiates people on the conservative side of politics to the left-hand socialist side, which you just pointed out so ably. If they speak their mind, they're Gonski.
Sure, but what you're saying is you defend Jamie Briggs's right to have those views, but you don't agree with them.
Well, if you're talking about closing down the steel industry, I don't think that's what Jamie's proposing, maybe he is. But I don't believe in closing down the steel industry. I think it's extremely important that we have a manufacturing industry. If we end up as a nation that digs up black rocks, digs up red rocks, coal and iron ore, and then relies on the service industry to spin it round, there'll come a time we'll come unstuck.
Another issue this week is the Parliamentary Budget Office. Now, this is something that Joe Hockey essentially wants to put in place, a mechanism for budget honesty that is separate to that. You were part of a committee, a bipartisan committee, that advocated all the powers of the budget of the Parliamentary Budget Office, which are the very things now that Joe Hockey is saying he won't abide by.
Well, the thing is that it's like this. The Labor Party with Treasury has the capacity to put up a proposal, Peter, go to it, adjust it, go to it, adjust it, go backwards and forth, transparent, to look at the costings. For us, we get one ball in the over. We bowl it, that's it. Therefore, we're at a complete disadvantage to them. Therefore, we need confidentiality, and that is what has to happen if we are to utilise this process. Otherwise, it'll just be used as a mechanism against us. The whole point of the Parliamentary Budget Office is to give us some form of equivalence with the Treasury, not to put us at a disadvantage to the Treasury.
But you're not following the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is the thing that you supported in a bipartisan committee, which Joe Hockey... you're not following it because Joe Hockey's moving away from it.
Well, there was no recommendation there that specifically stated about precluding what Joe wants. I think everybody understands that the whole point of the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office, is to give the opposition at least some fair armaments as what the government has. Now, the government has a whole massive bureaucracy, a massive building just down the hill from Parliament called the Treasury. You can go in there, you can go out of there. They've got massive resources. The PBO is very much a small, sort of insular group, and there, because it's small, the resources are left. We need one tactical advantage, that is because we can't just go backwards and forth. We need that confidentiality in the proposal we put forward. And if we get that, then we have a greater sense of fairness, a greater sense of parity, because it's all confidential what the government does with Treasury. They don't display every move and move they make. They can go look at a policy, say that doesn't quite work, go back again. All those movements, Peter, are confidential. We just have one ball and we've got to try and hit it.
So very simple question, were you and Joe Hockey on the same page at the start of this process when he decided he didn't want to do what the Parliamentary Budget Office recommendations included?
Well, the Parliamentary Budget Office recommendations do not say anything about confidentiality. It is an issue that's become essential to us to bring about a organisation, a piece of legislation that works. And to be honest, Peter, every recommendation by a joint party or a Senate committee does not become chapter verse of what the legislation is. True, it is a strong guiding light, but there is always amendments in the minutiae of what you need. And we're not talking about a major amendment here. It's a very minor amendment, and I think in good nature, because the Labor government, the way they're going to need the PBO more than us. And if I was them, I'd be agreeing...
You're going to be in opposition soon.
Yeah. If I was them, I'd be agreeing to this, because otherwise I'll be looking at all their costings and ramming it down their throat.
John Howard says you can't take anything for granted in politics. He said it on Australian Agenda on Sunday. Mm-hmm. He might say that that was a little bit of overconfidence from you just then.
No, I think that's a reflection on the polls. If it's the policies they've been taking have been ludicrous. The carbon tax, live cattle trade, ceiling insulation, building the education revolution, their war against obesity. I don't know, do we win that war or lose it? What happened to the fat people?
I think it's an ongoing war. But
Aussie's behind me, so I think we lost.
Let me move on to another issue. There's an opinion article today in The Australian by Nikki Savin. Now, she's a former senior press advisor, press secretary, I think, to Peter Costello. She says in there that Barnaby Joyce has way too much sway. Now, she's reflecting the views of some Liberals. Do you hear that from anyone inside the coalition?
No, I don't. But I'll take it as a compliment, because whenever, from the National Party side, they say we don't have enough, so I'm going to use Nikki Sav's line in all my literature back to my members. Unfortunately, it's not the truth. We have a very open and dialogue. We have a strong cordial relationship with the leadership team of the Liberal Party. It is a business relationship. I don't see what the problem is if we're working together well. That's what it's supposed to be about, isn't it?
Well, the issue, I think, as it is that some Liberals who are perhaps more free trade than yourself are worried that you're too close, or that Tony Abbott is too close to you. On the other side, some Nationals are worried that Tony Abbott is paying lip service now in opposition, which he may not reflect in government when it really matters. This is welcome to the world of politics. We try to come up with effective policies. We've got a good team. We've taken the Labor Party to record lows. We've put ourselves in a winning position. As a leadership team, as a shadow cabinet, we have been an extremely effective organisation. I think more power to our arm. Let's keep it going that way, because that's how you win. I can't let you go without a quick discussion about some of your flamboyant, at times, rhetoric. I want to get your views on some of this, a bit of a trip down memory lane, if I can. We're going to bring up, I was just mentioning your relationship with Tony Abbott. We're going to bring up on screen something you once said about that. It says here, "I talk to Tony all the time. We have a very constructive relationship and not a sexual relationship."
I confirm
what were you
that.
getting to there?
Well, I just want to confirm that we don't have a sexual relationship, and we still don't. And I think consistency in politics is very important. I haven't absconded from that principle like the Labor Party has absconded from the carbon tax.
There's another quote that you gave to the Sydney Morning Herald in March last year. It was in relation to the Productivity Commission. "I use them when I run out of toilet paper." You're talking about Productivity Commission reports. One had just come out in your area of water policy. You've mentioned to me off camera that you now have a former staffer or a staffer of yours from the Productivity Commission. Is that a change of heart?
Well, it just goes to show you that, as John Maynard Keynes says, when I get new information, I change my mind. And I changed my mind and got one of the shining lights in there, and he's the chief of staff for me. So, there's hope for me yet.
Have you got a new perspective from when you first came onto the scene about your rhetoric? And I ask this seriously, not jokingly, because on the one hand, your critics like to sort of throw barbs at you about it. On the other hand, someone like John Howard describes you as essentially the best retail politician of your generation. Yeah. The rhetoric's a real positive, even though your detractors like to poke fun at you about it. How do you kind of manage the good or the bad within it?
Well, Peter, before I came into politics, I had an accountancy practice, my own accountancy practice with my own staff that I built up. And I would charge people by the hour for what I had to say and how I dealt with them. And I always worked on the principle that you get to the point quickly because money's time, and you make sure that you can communicate with your client so that they can have a better outcome, financial outcome, and understand their business as quickly as possible. I feel in the world of 24/7 media, which you're part of and this show's part of, that now those punters out there know us better, and they know you better than you will ever know them. So it's not like Menzies' time with the 10-minute radio interview and the rest of the time in Parliament in a sort of splendid isolation. It's a very much an interactive relationship. So you should talk to the people the way you talk to the people at the pub, at the golf club, down on the street. People have to get to know you because that's how they get to trust you, and that's how you can get a message across quickly to them, to convey thoughts, to convey ideas, to promulgate your views, and to present a policy. I hope people don't try and confuse a directness, a familiarity with stupidity. We think very clearly and conscientiously about what we do, and then a lot of effort goes into making sure we get that message into a concise form so that people can consume it.
What about the rhetoric that you use to try to talk to your National Party colleague, albeit someone who sits on the crossbenches, Tony Crook? Now, the National Party in WA are a different beast. They support the Columbine government at a state level, but they are not in coalition with it like the National Party is around the rest of the country. Tony Crook has taken up that approach, essentially. He's sitting on the crossbench. You'd like to one day lead the National Party. Presumably before that day, you'd like to see Tony Crook sitting with the Nationals in Parliament.
Well, of course I'd like to see Tony sit with us, but that's a question for Tony. I know that the...
Shouldn't it be a question for the National Party nationally, though? I mean, he is a member of your party.
No, the way the National Party works is their own state entities, and still is, from the LNP to the National Party in New South Wales, the National Party in Victoria, and the National Party in Western Australia. And then it's a familial affiliation at a federal level. And you cannot tell the National Party in another state what to do, and certainly not the National Party in Western Australia. Being a Western Australian yourself, you know what starts happening to you if you start telling West Australians what to do.
That's very true. One final question, because we're almost out of time before I let you go. Yep. Look me in the eye and tell me that you think that Tony Abbott's generous, incredibly generous, paid parental leave scheme is the best way to go?
I think it's incredibly important that we understand that women have the capacity to have a child and get back into the workforce, and that we're not discriminating against someone who's we want all people to have babies. And there's your grab for tomorrow. Not just you know. So if someone's a solicitor and they say, oh, look, I was going to have a kid, but I can't afford to get out of it because I can't afford my mortgage if I drop out of the workforce. Well, that's no good for us. We've got to make sure that all people from all sections of society are equally inspired to have children, because we want to grow our population as much as we can from the people we've got here.
So are you in lockstep with one that is as generous as this one?
Well, Tony's proposal is a coalition proposal. It's what we're taking to the people.
It sounds like a no to me.
It's what other way can we get people who are solicitors, doctors, accountants, who are women, to have a child without dropping completely out of the workforce or losing their house? We've got to come up with some proposal that does it. And this is the proposal we've got. And this is if you've got a better idea of how to stop these people from going to the workforce, and tell us about it. But this is a way that makes sure that all people are equally inspired to have children, as politically incorrect as that statement is.
All right, Barnaby Joyce, Maverick National Party Senator, member of the Coalition Frontbench, thanks for joining us on Showdown.
My pleasure, Peter.
When we come back from the break, we'll be joined by New South Wales Treasurer Mike Baird. We're now joined by New South Wales Treasurer, as promised, Mike Baird. Thanks for your company.
Pleasure, Peter.
You delivered your first budget last week, but let's be honest here. Long term, Barnaby Joyce just admitted that he one day wants to lead the National Party. You must one day want to lead the Liberal Party.
Oh, I think that anyone that has followed state politics understands the challenges that you have, and I have in particular as Treasurer of the state. That's my goal and ambition. There is
not a long-term goal and ambition. Come on, let's be honest. You don't want to be Peter Costello delivering your 11th budget 11 years from now. You'd be happy to be in government, but you'd rather be in government and be Premier by then, surely.
I think that having delivered one budget, the thought of 11 or 12, my respect for Peter Costello goes up and up. The thought of doing 12 of them is incredible. No, listen, the challenges to turn around this state are immense, and I generally feel incredibly privileged to be Treasurer of the state. It is a long journey to turn the finances around, and I'm incredibly happy to support Barry O'Farrell, who's doing an outstanding job as Premier of the state.
All right. And in fairness to you, I think sort of 6 months into a premiership after 16 years in the wilderness, I think it should take some time before genuine leadership speculation truly starts up, and that time certainly isn't now. You mentioned your first budget as Treasurer. Let me ask you a rhetorical question and then seek a comment. What does Mike Baird and Wayne Swan have in common? Neither have delivered a surplus budget.
Well, that's true. I mean, we're in the position that we inherited an incredible array of challenges from state Labor. One, if you actually took away the federal stimulus, what you would have seen in New South Wales, which wasn't seen in the headlines and never reported before, was that New South Wales has effectively been in deficit since 2008. They've hidden it on the back of these stimulus payments. Going forward, the deficit is getting worse and worse, out to about $2.7 billion in 2014-15. So we have inherited a structural deficit, but what we have done is map out a return back to surplus. We've made decisions in this budget to get us back into a surplus position, and it is challenging. I mean, the global economic times that we're facing is putting downward pressure on revenue, and it is a challenge.
We'll talk about some of the particulars in the budget in a moment, but the political decision to have a deficit before returning to surplus, whatever the cause, whatever you inherited, it must have been a tough political decision, because Liberals don't like delivering deficits.
Well, I think it's the right decision at the right time. I mean, I do have some genuine concerns about what we're seeing globally. There is no doubt that there is a lack of confidence across the market, both in consumers and businesses, and we're in a position where we want to get on and deliver the infrastructure that's been talked about, but not actually delivered by state Labor. So bringing all of those packages together, I think it was the right thing in relation to this current budget, and we are transitioning. You know, we've inherited a runaway train in terms of expenses. It does take time to slow that down, and we've already taken steps, and we're very confident that over the next 12 months, what you will see is expenses coming back under control and surpluses starting to emerge.
Is it really tough enough, though? I mean, you had a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really put down a tough budget, like Jeff Kennett did after he took over in Victoria after years of problems with the Kane and Kerner governments, like John Howard did in his first budget, that he inherited a situation from Paul Keating where there was a budget black hole, so-called. You know, you had a real opportunity here. I think the punters would have copped it after everything that was said about how bad this Labor government was. Yet the budget didn't seem, it certainly wasn't soft, but it certainly wasn't very hard.
And I think that's, you know, what you have. You've got two ends of the equation. You've got some that have said we haven't gone hard enough. There's others that said we've gone too hard, including, you know, over 30,000 people that were circling Parliament House last Thursday on some of the measures we've taken. You know, we have made some very tough decisions, I think, you know, whether it be on the wages policy. I mean, that forever and a day has hindered the Labor government for the past 16 years before we won in March. We've made decisions about voluntary redundancies. We've made decisions across restructuring health and transport. There are so many things that we have done, and prisons and justice reform. You know, we've built some prisons.
Let me jump in, sorry, on the voluntary redundancies one. I mean, a voluntary redundancies that tough a decision? I mean, my experience about looking at voluntary redundancies is if it's a voluntary redundancy, the people that leave are the good people, the people that can get another job easily, go overseas, go interstate, find a position in the private sector. You lose your best and your brightest, whereas when they're not voluntary redundancies, that's when you can really root out the deadwood that you don't need.
Well, we are going to be systematic about this, and across every agency it's going to be targeted. So this is not a carte blanche, this is very much targeted, and it's about agencies and departments moving towards structures that are leaner in a head office context, that provide capacity to put more down to the front line. And that's what this is about. It's like we have head offices that are too large, stretched at the front line, we need to move them down. So we think that the package we put together is sensible, it is strategic because it is targeted, and it does provide us a capacity to deliver the savings and improve services.
I'm comfortable with the targeted strategy. I'm comfortable with more being put into front line, which includes some of the job positions that are coming in, not just the redundancies. But I just want to stick on voluntary redundancies. I mean, do you accept, you come from a business background, voluntary redundancies usually means the best and the brightest take them up because they know they can get the payout and they can get a job somewhere else.
Well, you know, there is going to be an opportunity for individuals to make that choice, and clearly, you know, we have a whole range of activities and work that needs to be done to enable us to achieve those job targets. Now,
but you should be stopping the best and the brightest doing it. But if it's voluntary redundancies, you're going to have a situation where line managers who are making these calls on these redundancy packages, they're going to say yes to people that really you would want working in the public service because they're who you need to get the state back on track after all these years of Labor.
Yeah, and I agree, Peter. I mean, I think that what you want is a talent organisation, one that's rewarding those that are your brightest and those that are working hardest. And I think we're moving to that culture. We do need a change of culture. And ultimately, if you think of the opportunities for people that stay within the public service, there's, under the structure we're talking about, there's increased managerial responsibility around the corner. I mean, there's a chance to take ownership of businesses in a much more empowered way. We are giving the agencies the tools and the means to deliver improved services, to deliver some record infrastructure, both by the way we've attacked the funding of that and the commitments that we have made to improved infrastructure. So I would say it's a very exciting time to be part of the New South Wales Public Service, and young managers and aspiring managers and senior managers, some are going to get some real, very significant opportunities in the next few weeks and months.
But wouldn't that be a perfect reason to make it compulsory redundancies then, so you can really root out the people that you don't need and not lose the bright ones, the best?
Yeah, well, I do think through our strategic and targeted approach we can achieve both of those outcomes.
All right, I mentioned this idea of a soft versus a hard budget. You talk the line that you're trying to sort of get the balance right, but back to the once-in-a-generational opportunity of this. Is this a case of learning, I guess, from Howard maybe, you know, incrementalism? He was tough at the start, but then he became more of an incrementalist. Is this a case of Barry O'Farrell and yourself looking at what he ended up doing that became successful as opposed to the early changes which were needed, most historians would say, but put him in a pretty tough spot a year or two later when he had to go to an election?
Listen, I think, people have underestimated Barry O'Farrell for a lot of the last 5 years, well, indeed 16 years in his time in government. He has delivered an historic victory to the Liberal National Party in this state, and he was embraced by communities across this state. Now, the approach is pretty simple. We are not going to turn around this state in one budget. We're just not going to do it. We have outlined a very strong fiscal strategy on where we're going. We are clearly not going to tolerate expense growth that's out of control. We need to get back to a sustainable basis. And why do we want to be sustainable with our finances? Well, pretty simple, because we want to improve the services that we've heard from one part of New South Wales to the other. They're desperate to see, and part of that is by putting more police, more teachers, more nurses into the front line. We want to build the infrastructure that people are crying out for in an absolute strategic way. We don't want to see infrastructure like the CBD Metro, which was done on the back of an envelope. We're going to prioritise them in exactly the way they should be, with economic rigour. And those sort of decisions, I think, is what the community wants. They want sensible government making sound decisions, at the same time controlling the runaway expenses and the growth we've seen. If we start to do that, not only can we deliver on that, but we're also in a position, should there be global economic downturns, to respond. So, this is a start of a long journey to get this state back where it should be, which is leading the nation. And I think that what this budget done is outline exactly the fiscal strategy that we should be taking.
All right, one final question. You wouldn't bite at the first question about leadership inside the state parliament, understandable after 6 months, but what about this one? Your state seat falls within Tony Abbott's federal seat. Any interest in a federal political career after your state one is finished, whenever that time might be, which could coincide with the end of an Abbott prime ministership?
Absolutely not. No, I would
no
be...
No chance. You'll rule that one out.
I'm very, very happy to rule that out, and I'm very happy to support Tony Abbott, because he needs a lot of support over the next couple of years, if an election doesn't come before that. I can't keep up with him on this bike or running, but I'm very happy to support him. So I can't tell you how excited I am about the opportunities in this state. And the role as Treasurer is an incredible privilege, as is being the member for Manly. But in that context, there is so much to do to turn this state around, and that's where my focus is, my attention is, and my passion is, because we can be great again. And I think that all of us in New South Wales are just looking for some sensible leadership to take us on that path. All
right, Mike Baird, New South Wales Treasurer, appreciate you joining us on Showdown. When we come back from the break, we'll be talking to Rick Kalowski, who's the writer and executive producer of that series on Julia Gillard, At Home with Julia. Now, we've got a clip of that. Is this really the way that a Prime Minister should be talked about and treated, even in a satire?
What are we meant to do in an hour?
Teacup. Quickies can be fun too. Oh, hello, you. Give Mummy a kiss, yes. Oh, you like that, don't you? You like that, eh? Turn around and I'll give the other end a go. There we are. Oh, Mummy loves her Bill.
I thought his name was Tim.
Who's Tim?
That's At Home with Julia. That was Bill Shorten, the name of the dog. And we've got with us the writer and executive producer of At Home with Julia, Rick Kalowski. Thanks for your company.
Thank you very much. Congratulations on your new show.
Thank you, and congratulations on your new show. We'll get that mutual admiration out of the road. Now, I've got to keep a straight face here. This is a showdown. It's not about whether it's funny or not. Is it appropriate to do that to a Prime Minister? Before the ad break, you had a sexual orientation gag. We just saw then Bill Shorten depicted as a dog. Yes. More sexual innuendo followed. We've got more clips to come. Is this really appropriate?
I think so. I think
of course you think so, but is it really appropriate? I
think it is.
In the wider community's mind.
Yes. Well, some people think it's fine because I think it's funny, and some people think that it's out of bounds. I think, to be honest, this debate about whether it's appropriate or not is really a proxy war. It's really a proxy war between people who are strong supporters of the Prime Minister and those who aren't. And people who adore the Prime Minister are offended we've done the show at all, and people who don't like her, which at the moment is quite a lot of people, seem to think the show's hilarious. I think that the debate about whether it's appropriate to do it to a Prime Minister or not is a little bit of a furphy. For what it's worth, I think that it's actually a responsibility of people who write comedy or satire or try to take on the government of the day.
I couldn't agree more with that, but is this a case of this kind of satire and this kind of comedy is much more in play because she's a woman? I mean, you wouldn't have At Home with John Howard, you wouldn't have At Home with Kevin Rudd, I don't think, but you do have At Home with Julia, poking a bit of fun at the de facto relationship and the first female PM.
It's not because she's a woman. To be honest, it's actually intended as a compliment. We think she's a really interesting character. And the truth is that as dramatists, in this context and as writers, the circumstance of that relationship with Tim Matheson is very unusual for a couple of reasons. One of them is obviously that it's the first time we've had a complete reversal of the normal sort of power status in that sort of political arrangement, which is you have a very powerful female leader and a man who's not in politics. We're used to seeing the absolute opposite. And I think that's really interesting as a writer. And I think the second thing, as I said, is I think she's a really interesting character. I probably wouldn't do one about John Howard or Kevin Rudd. I probably would have been happy to do one about Keating or Hawke or Malcolm Turnbull or someone like that, or even, I mean... And
do you acknowledge at least, though, that this couldn't have come at a worse time for her? Don't go telling me this humanises her. It doesn't humanise her, it takes the mickey out of her.
I admit I actually don't know that it is actually in the end bad timing for her, because I think it actually may well have that effect on people. And actually, a number of people I've seen on Twitter, in the last few days have said that they like the character more than the real person.
Well, let's have a look at that character. I want to show some footage here. This is, with the credits rolling, we can talk over this. It's a situation where she is packing her bags. Now, here we are at the end of the show. Your credits are rolling, not ours. There she is, packing her bag. She's in her 90, for heaven's sake. This is the supposed Prime Minister of Australia. You've got her in her 90.
He's not wearing a shirt.
Well, he's at least got the doona over the top. I mean, a red 90, it's just... It removes the sort of the aura and the mystique of office, surely.
Look, to some extent that's true, but I want to be clear that I would be equally happy to do that to a male Prime Minister if they were interesting enough character, I have to say. I really would. I mean, if John Howard was an interesting enough character, I would have been happy to see him in his Jim Jams, or, God help us, not in his Jim Jams.
Don't even say it. Let's show another piece of footage. Now, this shows that you're not just singling out poor old Julia here, you're also taking Tim.
G'day, Wayne. Bought you some lunch. Oh, you've eaten.
I'm sorry, Prime Minister, you need it in the cabinet room.
Better chuff. If I'm late, Kevin starts without me.
Yeah.
Toads, can you pick up the ingredients for tonight?
Yeah, should be able to squeeze it in.
The question there is which minister ends up taking that out of the bin to eat it, but you didn't go that far.
Unclear.
Let's ask, you mentioned Kevin Rudd's in there as part of the joke.
Yeah.
Are we going to see these sort of characters in future episodes? There's three more to go, I think. Are we going to see Rudd, Swan and so forth?
I think that's the other point to make. This show, really, to the extent that it's a political offender, it's an equal opportunity offender. Kevin Rudd turns up in the show, Julie Bishop, Tony Abbott, Tony Jones from the ABC, Alan Jones turns up. You've already seen Rob Oakeshott, Bob Catter, Tony Windsor. Wayne Swan turns up in the show. Paul Keating turns up. You've already heard him. You've heard his voice in episode 1. He turns up on screen. There's any number of politicians on both sides of the political fence who turn up.
We had a tweet that came in saying it has nothing to do with her being female. It has everything to do with her being a joke herself. That's the point. It's not helping her. That's what people think.
Well, that might be right. I should say, by the way, in some defence to my fellow writers and I, when we first thought of this show, which was in August last year, she was temporarily the most popular person in the country. And the ABC thought it was a wonderful idea, not because she was popular or unpopular, but it was, at the time we thought of the idea, she was wildly popular. It so happened that by the time it went to air, she's having a bit of a rough trot. But it was certainly, I only say this, it was certainly not intended that we would go to air at a time to cause maximum difficulty or embarrassment for the Prime Minister.
Well, Twitter is going nuts, reinforcing some of those difficulties that she's facing. I mean, at the end of the day, look, we'll see how we go. Is there any chance of it going beyond 4 episodes?
Well, we'd love to. We have lots of ideas for more.
Is there any chance?
Yes, I think there is. I think there's a real chance of us doing more of this series, or, depending on circumstances, a close variant of it. Another show which involves a lot of the same characters and is sort of a political satire which takes on all comers.
OK, Rick Kalowski, writer and executive producer of At Home with Julia. We appreciate you joining us on Showdown.
Thank you very much, and congratulations again on your show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your company, and that's the end of the first edition of Showdown. Tell us what you thought on the show. On Twitter, just use the hashtag Showdown, or email us at showdown@skynews.com.au. Paul Murray Live is next, plus the latest news headlines, including that breaking news out of Kabul. I'm Peter Van Onselen. Thanks for your company.